What if someone watched one too many episodes of Dexter and decided they could do it better? One aspiring filmmaker thought he could create the perfect murder. Instead, he left behind one of the dumbest pieces of evidence a killer has ever written. Welcome back to Thick Thighs and Murder Vibes, the podcast where we dive into true crime with a healthy dose of sarcasm, unhinged commentary, and the occasional reminder that some people really should have stuck to their hobbies. Okay, besties. Today, we're heading to Edmonton, Alberta, where one man's obsession with becoming the next big filmmaker took a dark and deadly turn. Inspired by a fictional serial killer, convinced he was smarter than everyone else, and desperate to create the perfect crime, Mark Twitchell blurred the line between fantasy and reality in the worst possible way. Now, before we get into it, I want to make one thing very clear. This is not a how-to guide. This is a how not to guide. If your life plan starts with, I got this idea from a TV show, I'm going to need you to rethink some things. This episode isn't about glorifying a murderer. It's about remembering the victim, understanding the investigation, and looking at how one man's ego and obsession ultimately became the thing that exposed him. Grab your snacks, settle in, and maybe don't take life advice from television characters, because this is the story of Mark Twitchell. So let me introduce you to Mark. Mark Twitchell was a man so profoundly unremarkable. Born in 1979 in Edmonton, Alberta, his greatest pre-murder achievement was a Star Wars fan film that approximately nobody watched. Star Wars Secrets of the Rebellion was so aggressively terrible that even die-hard Star Wars nerds couldn't sit through it. But Mark believed he was a misunderstood genius, a visionary filmmaker whose talents were simply too sophisticated for the masses to appreciate. He was wrong. Mark Twitchell was mediocre. His marriage was crumbling. His film career was non-existent. His life was a monument of ordinariness. When you're a narcissist who can't accept being ordinary, and honestly, I need us to sit with that fact, this man's biggest problem was apparently being average. Not poverty, not some tragic childhood, not some lifelong prosecution. He was just pissed off that he wasn't as special as he thought he was. Which, buddy, I have some devastating news for you. Most of us are fucking average. That's kind of how society works. You don't get to unlock a secret character class because you watched enough Dexter. I guess when you're desperate to be somebody, to matter, to prove you're special, you make choices. Mark's choice was murder. The catalyst? A television show. Mark Twitchell watched Dexter. And Mark, in his infinite wisdom, saw himself. For those blessedly unfamiliar with the mid-2000s Showtime phenomenon Dexter, it followed the exploits of Dexter Morgan, a blood spatter analyst for Miami Metro Police, who moonlighted as a serial killer with a code. He only killed other killers. The show presented a sanitized Hollywood version of murder. Clean, methodical, almost surgical. Dexter was brilliant, controlled, and always 3 steps ahead. He wrapped his victims in plastic, killed them on a table, and disposed of them in the ocean with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. He was brilliant, controlled, the sophisticated killer, the perfect killer who never got caught. Well, until the writers ran out of ideas, but that's another story. Mark watched this show and saw himself. And this is where I would like to personally request that television come with a warning label. Please do not watch this program and immediately decide you have a new career, because Dexter is a fictional serial killer. Mark was watching a television show and apparently thought, you know what? I could do that. Sir, you couldn't even successfully do filmmaking. Maybe let's not make murder your backup plan. Now, let me be crystal clear about something. Mark Twitchell was not Dexter Morgan. Mark was not brilliant. He was not sophisticated. He was a failed filmmaker with a fragile ego and a desperate need to be special, to be somebody, to matter in a room. So, what do? Well, if you're Mark Twitchell, you decide to become a serial killer, because if you can't be a successful filmmaker, at least you can be a successful murderer, right? At least you could try to be good at something. You can prove to the world, and more importantly, to yourself, that you're not just another forgettable nobody destined to die without leaving a mark on history. The psychological cornerstone of Mark's entire descent into murder wasn't trauma, wasn't abuse, wasn't some dark childhood secret. It was just a television show. This absolute specimen of human garbage watched a fictional character and thought, yes, that's me. That's who I am. I'm Dexter Morgan. Never mind that Dexter was a fictional construct created by writers in a room. Never mind that Dexter's code was a narrative device designed to make audiences root for a serial killer. Never mind that real murder is messy, chaotic, brutal, and nothing like the choreographed elegance of premium cable television. Mark Twitchell believed he could emulate and surpass Dexter Morgan. Mark believed he was smarter than everyone else, more creative, more capable. He believed that his artistic vision would translate from failed filmmaking to successful murderer. He genuinely, truly, pathetically believed he was smart enough, sophisticated enough, and special enough to get away with it. Spoiler alert, he wasn't. This case is a study in narcissistic delusion colliding headfirst with brutal reality. A man so consumed by his own fantasy of who he wanted to be that he couldn't see what he actually was. A bumbling fool playing dress-up in a serial killer costume several sizes too big. Because while Mark was planning his perfect murders, while he was setting up his garage like a discount version of Dexter's kill room, he was also doing something spectacularly stupid. He was writing it all down. Mark Twitchell wrote a screenplay. A detailed, explicit screenplay about a filmmaker who lures victims to his garage and murders them. And listen, I have absolutely no problem with writers getting dark. True crime exists, horror exists, crime fiction exists. But there is a difference between I'm writing a disturbing fictional story and let me document my murder plans in excruciating detail and save the files on my personal computer. At some point, you have to look at your own work and go, you know what? Maybe I don't need to print this. A screenplay that read less like fiction and more like a confession. Documenting his methodology, his fantasies, his plans. He wrote blog posts about his obsession with killing. He kept detailed records. He documented everything because in his diseased mind, he wasn't just committing murders. He was creating art. The man who wanted to be the perfect killer, who studied Dexter like a graduate thesis, who believed he was too intelligent to be caught, left behind some of the most damning, idiotic, self-incriminating evidence in criminal justice history. You wanted to be special, Mark. Congratulations. You're a special kind of stupid. What follows is how a mediocre filmmaker traded his camera for a knife, his actors for victims, his failed career for a life sentence. It's the story of real people who died because one narcissistic man-child couldn't accept being ordinary. It's how fantasy and reality collided in the Edmonton garage, and how the perfect killer turned out to be one of the dumbest criminals to ever walk free. Mark Twitchell wanted to create a masterpiece. Instead, he created a horror show. And he was never the director. He was always the joke. Mark didn't just plan murders, he wrote a fucking screenplay about them. The document was titled SK Confessions. SK for serial killer, because subtlety wasn't Mark's strong suit. Later presented in court as a profile of a serial killer. This wasn't vague artistic exploration. This was a detailed, explicit, step-by-step instruction manual for murder, written in first person. documenting exactly how a filmmaker would lure victims to his garage and kill them. And Mark saved it on his laptop, with his name on it, in his possession. The screenplay described creating fake profiles on dating websites to lure victims. It described the messages sent, the psychological manipulation used to build trust. It described the garage layout, plastic sheeting, a game table for restraint, weapon positioning, lighting setup. It described the attack methodology, hockey mask, pipe weapon, element of surprise, immediate violence. It described restraints, zip ties, duct tape, rope. It described the murder weapon, a hunting knife with a serrated edge, used to stab victims multiple times in the torso. It described dismemberment and body disposal, cutting bodies into pieces, placing them in garbage bags, attempting disposal in storm sewers, then dumping remains in fields when that failed. And Mark wrote all of this believing he was creating art. He treated his victim communications like screenplay dialogue, revising and editing until he got the tone just right. He kept drafts. He saved every version. He documented his creative process like a filmmaker, preparing for production. He also kept a blog where he wrote about his dark artistic journey and his Dexter obsession, posts about feeling different from other people and understanding darkness in ways that others couldn't, posts about how true artists had to explore the darkest aspects of human nature. When read alongside his actual crimes, these became evidence of premeditation and psychological state. Mark's internet search history read like, how to be a serial killer for dummies, how to dispose of a human body, how long does it take for a body to decompose, luminol detection of blood, how to clean up a crime scene, forensic evidence in murder cases, serial killer psychology, Dexter Morgan kill room setup. That one is probably my favorite. How to avoid leaving DNA evidence, body dismemberment techniques, storm sewer system Edmonton. He searched for all of this on his personal computer using his own internet connection without any attempt to hide his digital footprint, because Mark apparently didn't understand that the internet keeps receipts. He even took photographs of his garage workshop, documenting his setup like a proud homeowner showing off renovation. Pictures of plastic sheeting, pictures of the game table, pictures of his weapons laid out like tools. He photographed his kill room and saved the images, thinking this was normal behavior for an artist documenting his creative process. Mark thought this screenplay was good writing. He thought this transparent, obvious, barely fictionalized confession was going to be his breakthrough, his masterpiece, the thing that would finally prove Mark Twitchell was a serious artist. In reality, it read like it was written by a teenager who just discovered the word edgy. It was pretentious, obviously the fantasy of someone who had never done any of the things he was describing. But Mark wasn't creating fiction. He was creating evidence. A 31-page document that would prove premeditation, demonstrate methodology, establish motive, and connect him directly to murder. The single most damning piece of evidence in the entire case. And he wrote it himself. Mark Twitchell was a predator who weaponized the internet and human loneliness. His methodology was pathetically simple. Create fake profiles on dating websites, pose as an attractive woman, craft personas designed to appeal to lonely men, send messages, build rapport, make promises, then suggest meeting in person, and always at a location that he controlled. Mark primarily used Plenty of Fish and other platforms popular in Edmonton in 2008. His fake profiles were Sheena and Jen, friendly, flirty, interested, and available. The profiles featured stolen photographs of attractive women, complete with fabricated biographical details, designed to seem authentic. Interests that seemed genuine but generic enough to appeal broadly. Movies, dining out, outdoor activities, travel, the huge. Mark didn't immediately suggest meeting. He would be suspicious. He played the long game. He chatted, he flirted, he asked questions about their jobs, their interests, their lives, and he pretended to care. He mirrored their communication styles, adapting his responses to match their energy and tone. He created the illusion of real interest, the genuine connection forming between two people. The effectiveness of this methodology relied on exploiting fundamental human psychology. Online dating in 2008 was still relatively new, and the platforms lacked the sophisticated verification and safety features that exist today. People were more trusting and less aware of the dangers, and Mark understood something crucial. Lonely people want to believe. They want to believe someone finds them interesting and attractive and somebody that's worth knowing. That desire to believe overrides caution. He would chat for days, sometimes a week or more, building false intimacy through messages. Then, once he'd established what felt like genuine connection, he suggested meeting. The location was always his garage, 5610 86th Avenue, a space he'd rented for $120 a month, specifically for his project. The excuses varied. Maybe he was working on a film project nearby and could meet during a break. Maybe he had equipment to show them related to his filmmaking. Maybe it was just convenient, close to where he was working. The destination was always the same, his kill room. And men came because they were lonely, because they wanted connection, because they believed someone might actually be interested in them. Because meeting someone from an online dating site at an unusual location didn't yet carry the red flags it does today. Let's say their names. Let's remember these were real human beings with lives, families, and futures. Giles Tetralant was 31 years old when he encountered Mark's predatory web. He worked in the telecommunications industry, lived in Edmonton, Alberta, and, like millions of people, was using online dating to try and find companionship. On October 3rd of 2008, Giles received messages from Sheena on Plenty of Fish. She was interested in him. She wanted to meet. She suggested a garage in South Edmonton where she was supposedly working on a project. Giles drove to the address on October 3rd, 2008, around 6 p.m. The overhead door was partially open. He parked, he got out, he approached the entrance, probably feeling that mixture of nervousness and excitement that comes with meeting someone new, wondering if the connection they'd built online would translate in real life. He called out, "Sheena," no response. Just the dim interior, fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows. Giles stepped inside, looking around for the woman he'd been messaging, when a figure in a hockey mask rushed at him from behind a partition. Mark swung a pipe. It connected with Giles's head, a glancing blow that sent him stumbling. Blood began flowing immediately, warm and shocking. But Giles didn't go down. He fought back. He threw his hands up, protecting his head. He backed away, creating distance. Mark swung again. Giles caught the pipe with his forearm, deflecting the worst of it. They struggled for control. Two men grappling in a cramped garage, one fighting to kill, and one fighting to survive. Giles was younger, stronger, and fighting for his fucking life. He kicked, he clawed, he used every survival instinct he possessed. He saw an opening. Mark had overextended on a swing, lost his balance slightly. He bolted for the garage entrance, blood streaming down his face, heart hammering. Mark tried to grab him, but Giles was faster and more desperate. He made it to his car. When he got inside, he locked the doors with shaking, bloody hands. He started the engine and drove away, leaving Mark standing in the garage entrance, watching his first victim escape. Giles Tetralant escaped with his life. He drove to a nearby gas station, tried to process what had just happened. He was bleeding, terrified, and confused. He didn't immediately go to police because he was embarrassed, unsure of how to explain what had happened, and uncertain if anyone would even believe him. He cleaned himself up, went home, and tried to convince himself it was some kind of robbery gone wrong. It wasn't until a week later, after another attack made the news, that Giles came forward and told investigators what had happened to him. Mark's first victim had escaped. His perfect methodology failed within minutes. The pipe didn't incapacitate. The surprise attack didn't overwhelm. The kill room didn't contain. Everything he'd planned fell apart the moment he encountered actual human resistance. But narcissists don't learn from failure. They rationalize it. They convince themselves next time will be different. They adjust their methodology and try again. Because a normal person might have looked at the situation and thought, "Holy shit, I almost killed somebody. I need to stop." Mark apparently looked at it and thought, "Okay, great. Beta test complete. Let's make some adjustments." 1 week later, Mark tried again. Johnny Altinger was 38 years old, working as a pipeline equipment salesman in the oil industry. He was the kind of person people genuinely liked. He was friendly, outgoing, reliable. He had close friends, a tight-knit family, and a life he'd built through hard work. His parents, Alfred and Jim Altinger, had raised Johnny and his siblings in a loving home. Johnny was close with his brother and maintained strong friendships from childhood through adulthood. He was single, looking for companionship, hoping to find someone to share his life with. Like millions of people, he turned to online dating. On October 10th, 2008, Johnny receives messages from Jen on Plenty of Fish. She was friendly, engaging, interested. They chatted over several days. She seemed genuine, and they made plans to meet. Jen suggested meeting at a location in South Edmonton. She gave him the address. I'm sure by now you know, 5610 86th Avenue. The garage. She explained she was working on a project there and could meet him during a break. Johnny did tell his friends about the date. He was excited, hopeful. He shared the address with them, a safety precaution, letting people know where he'd be. On October 10th, 2008, around 6 p.m., Johnny drove to the address in his red Mazda 3. He parked, he walked to the door, probably feeling nervous, excited, hopeful about meeting somebody new. Mark attacked immediately. The hockey mask, the pipe, sudden, overwhelming violence. But this time, Mark hit harder. This time, Mark was more aggressive. This time, Mark had learned from his failure with Giles. He'd positioned himself better, created less room for escape, and struck with more force and precision. Johnny did fight back. Every victim fights back when confronted with death, but Mark had the advantage of surprise, position, and preparation. The struggle was brutal. Johnny was hit multiple times with the pipe, struck in the head and body, knocked to the ground. Then Mark used the knife, the hunting knife he'd purchased specifically for this. He stabbed Johnny multiple times in the torso, in vital organs, and in places that would cause maximum damage. Johnny Altinger died in that garage. He died fighting. He died terrified. He died because Mark Twitchell had practiced on Giles' Tetralant and gotten better at killing. When Johnny didn't come home that night, his friends became concerned. When he didn't answer his phone on October 11th, they became worried. And when he didn't show up for work on October 13th, Johnny was a reliable man. He didn't miss work without calling. They knew something was wrong. Johnny's friends contacted each other, comparing notes. He'd told them about the date. He'd shared the address. They had the location where he was last seen. And on October 18th, 2008, Johnny's friends filed a missing persons report with Edmonton Police Service. They provided everything: the dating profile he'd been messaging, the address where he had gone, the timeline of his disappearance. Detective Mark Anstey of the homicide unit took the case. The circumstances were immediately suspicious. A man goes to meet someone from an online dating profile and vanishes. The profile turns out to be fake. The photo stolen. The person, non-existent. The address is a rented garage in an industrial area. Every detail screamed foul play. On October 19th, 2008, the investigation took a crucial turn. Giles Tetralant saw news coverage of Johnny Altinger's disappearance. He saw the address, 5610 86th Avenue, the same address where he'd been attacked 1 week earlier. Giles immediately contacted police and told them everything: the fake profiles, the messages, the attack, and his escape. Suddenly, investigators had a pattern. 2 men, both lured through fake dating profiles, both directed to the same location, and both attacked. One escaped, one vanished. This wasn't a random crime. This was a predator with a methodology, a hunting ground, and a kill room. The investigation moved with urgency. Police obtained records from Plenty of Fish, traced the fake profiles, identified the IP addresses used to create them. They obtained rental records for the garage, identified Mark Twitchell as the tenant. They found Johnny's abandoned Mazda 3 several blocks from the garage, and they obtained search warrants. Johnny's family waited for news, hoping against hope that he'd be found alive. His parents, his brother, his friends, all of them clinging to the possibility that this was a misunderstanding, that Johnny would come home. But as the investigation progressed, as evidence mounted, that hope faded. These men weren't characters in Mark's screenplay. They were human beings with families, friends, lives, and futures. Johnny Altinger had a career, and people loved him deeply. His disappearance devastated his family, left a hole in his friends' lives that would never be filled. Giles Tetralant survived, but he carries the trauma of that attack, the knowledge that he barely escaped with his life. Mark looked at their desire for connection, that fundamentally human desire to be known, to be cared for, to find companionship, and turned it into a weapon. He exploited their loneliness. He punished them for being trusting, for being open, for being willing to believe in human connection. There was no artistry in what he did, no sophistication, only cruelty, manipulation, and exploitation of human vulnerability. 5610 86th Avenue in Edmonton, Alberta, a nondescript garage bay in a light industrial area, the kind of space mechanics use to work on cars. This was Mark's masterpiece, the kill room he'd written about so lovingly in his screenplay. When police entered that garage on October 31st of 2008, after Johnny's friends had reported him missing, and after they traced his last location to this address, they found Mark's reality, and it was nothing like his fantasy. The garage was approximately 20 feet by 20 feet, had concrete floors, concrete walls, a single overhead door, and one side entrance. Had fluorescent lighting. It was nothing elegant, nothing sophisticated, just a dirty, cold space that smelled like oil and death. Detective Mark Anstey of the Edmonton Police Service Homicide Unit was the lead investigator. When he first entered that garage, he knew immediately they were looking at a homicide scene. The smell hit first. It was a combination of bleach, industrial cleaner, and something organic and wrong underneath. Death has a smell. Decomposition has a smell. No amount of cleaning products can fully mask it. The forensic team began documentation at 14:30 hours on October 31st. Photography first, hundreds of photographs from every angle, establishing the scene before anything was touched or moved. Video documentation, measurements, sketches, creating a permanent record of exactly what Mark Twitchell's artistic vision looked like in reality. Police found cheap plastic sheeting, the kind you buy at Home Depot for $20, haphazardly taped to portions of walls and floor. Not pristine, carefully installed plastic wrap. Not a seamless professional setup, just poorly installed plastic with gaps and tears and sections that had come loose. Some sections had been removed entirely, rolled up and stuffed in garbage bags. It looked exactly like what it was. An amateur copying something he'd seen on television. In the center sat a game table, not a purpose-built kill table. A fucking game table, the kind you'd find in someone's basement for poker. Mark had decided this would serve as his processing table. It had restraints, zip ties, rope, duct tape. There were bloodstains on the table that Mark had tried to clean but didn't fully remove. Blood that soaked into the wood grain, into crevices, into places no amount of bleach could reach. Forensic identification specialist Constable Dwayne Erickson conducted the luminol testing. When they turned off the lights and sprayed luminol across the garage surfaces, the entire space lit up like a constellation of violence. Blood spatter on the walls, cast-off patterns indicating a weapon being swung repeatedly. The angle and distribution of spatter told forensic analysts the victim had been on or near the game table when struck. Medium velocity impact spatter, consistent with blunt force trauma. High velocity miss patterns consistent with arterial spurring from the stab. The ceiling showed transfer patterns, blood that had been flung upward from a weapon in motion. Forensic analysts determined the weapon had been swung with significant force, multiple times, creating overlapping spatter patterns that indicated a sustained violent attack. The concrete floor was the most damning. Despite Mark's plastic sheeting, blood had seeped through gaps and tears. It had pooled in low spots in the concrete. It had soaked into the porous surface, creating stains that went millimeters deep. Luminol revealed blood trails, drag marks where something human-sized had been pulled from the game table towards the side door. Forensic analysts collected 47 separate blood samples from various locations throughout the garage. DNA analysts confirmed that the blood belonged to Johnny Altinger. His DNA was everywhere. On the table, on the floor, the walls, tools, on plastic sheeting, cleaning supplies Mark had used. Police found weapons scattered throughout the space. A hockey mask, the kind Jason Voorhees wears in Friday the 13th movies. Mark had actually worn this during his attacks, like he was playing dress up as a movie villain. The mask had blood spatter on the interior surface and DNA evidence linking it to both the attacker and the victim. A metal pipe approximately 18 inches long with blood and tissue residue and the threading on one end. This was the weapon used in the initial attack, the blunt force trauma that had incapacitated Johnny Altinger. Forensic analysts found Johnny's blood and hair embedded in the metal. Multiple knives, including a hunting knife with a serrated edge. Blood in the serrations that DNA testing linked to Johnny. There was a fillet knife, a utility knife. None of these were surgical instruments. These were weapons grabbed without understanding the first thing about killing efficiently. A hacksaw with biological material on the blade, bone fragments, tissue. This was the tool that Mark used for dismemberment. A hardware store hacksaw, the kind used for cutting PVC pipe. Forensic analysts found microscopic bone fragments and tissue samples that DNA testing confirmed belonged to Johnny. This is where Mark's fantasy completely collapsed into brutal, ugly reality. Police found garbage bags containing remains, pieces of Johnny that Mark had attempted to dispose of. The dismemberment had been executed with all of the skill of a butcher having a seizure. There was uneven cuts, hesitation marks, evidence of multiple attempts to cut through bone and joint. Forensic pathologist Dr. Bernard Bannock conducted the examination of remains. His report documented the violence. Multiple stab wounds to the torso, blunt force trauma to the head, evidence of restraint marks on wrists and ankles, defensive wounds on hands and forearms showing Johnny had fought back. The dismemberment showed no anatomical knowledge. Mark hadn't cut at joints or followed any logical pattern. He'd simply sawed through the bone wherever seemed easiest. The cuts were ragged, uneven, showing multiple false starts. Some bones showed saw marks from 3 or 4 different angles where Mark had tried and failed to cut through. Dr. Bannock's report estimated the dismemberment would have taken hours, exhausting, physically demanding hours of sawing through bone and tissue. Mark's screenplay had glossed over this reality. Television makes it look clean, quick, and almost surgical. The reality is brutal, messy, and requires far more physical strength and stomach than Mark possessed. Police found Johnny Altinger's personal effects, his wallet containing his driver's license, credit cards, and $60 in cash, his car keys, keys to the red Mazda 3 that had been found abandoned several blocks away, and his cell phone. The cell phone was crucial evidence. Mark had kept it. He used it to send text messages to Johnny's friends and family after the murder, trying to create the illusion that Johnny was still alive and that he'd simply decided to leave town for a while. Forensic analysis of the phone revealed text messages sent on October 11th and 12th after Johnny was already dead, claiming he'd met a woman and was going away for a while. The messages were written in a style that didn't match Johnny's normal texting patterns. They were too formal, too explanatory. They read more like someone trying to sound like Johnny rather than actually being Johnny. Cell tower data placed the phone at Mark's residence when these messages were sent, not at Johnny's apartment, not anywhere Johnny would logically be. The digital evidence created a timeline that destroyed any possibility of Mark's innocence. And there was the laptop, Mark's laptop, sitting on the workbench in the garage. Not hidden, not encrypted, not protected in any way, just sitting there, containing the entire digital record of his crimes. When forensic computer analyst Constable Jeff Elishuk examined the laptop, he found everything. The screenplay, quote, House of Cards, describing in detail a murder methodology that matched exactly what happened to Johnny Altinger. Blog posts where Mark discussed his fascination with serial killers and his belief that he could commit the perfect murder. And an internet search history from the weeks before. Some of those were how to dispose of a human body, luminol detection, how long does DNA last, storm sewer system in Edmonton, body dismemberment techniques. They also found the fake dating profiles Mark had created for Sheena and Jen, complete with stolen photos and fabricated biographical information. The messages he'd sent to Johnny and Giles, luring them to the garage. Every word, every lie, every manipulation preserved in digital format. They also found photos Mark had taken. Photos of the garage setup before the murders, photos of his kill room in progress, photos that showed the game table, the plastic sheeting, the weapons laid out like he was preparing for a film shoot. He documented his own crime scene before committing the crime. Mark had attempted to dispose of Johnny's remains in multiple locations, and he'd left evidence in every single site. On October 12th, a city worker inspecting storm sewers in the area around 86th Avenue reported finding what appeared to be biological material in a sewer grate. Police investigation revealed partial remains that DNA testing confirmed belonged to Johnny Altinger. The sewer grate was 3 blocks from Mark's garage. Forensic analysts of the sewer site found the tire tracks nearby, tracks that matched Mark's vehicle. Footprints in mud near the grate matched boots found in Mark's possession. Fibers found on the remains matched fibers from the trunk of Mark's car. On October 15th, a framer south of Edmonton reporting finding suspicious items in a field off Highway 14. Police investigation revealed more remains, along with garbage bags, plastic sheeting, and duct tape. And again, DNA testing confirmed these remains also belonged to Johnny Altinger. Forensic analysts of the field site found additional tire tracks matching Mark's vehicle. Soil samples from Mark's car trunk matched soil from the field. Plant material found in the trunk matched vegetation from the disposal site. Every piece of evidence created another link in the chain connecting Mark to the crime. The investigation moved with devastating precision. October 18th, Johnny's friends report him missing, provide the garage address where he had last been seen. On the 19th, Giles Tetrarant comes forward after seeing news coverage describing his attack 1 week earlier in the same location. October 24th, police obtained search warrants for the garage at 5610 86th Avenue. October 31st, forensic teams enter the garage, begins documentation and evidence collection. November 3rd, 2008, luminol testing reveals extensive blood evidence throughout the garage. November 5th, DNA analysts confirmed blood belonging to Johnny Altinger. November 8th, computer forensic team begin analysis of Mark's laptop. November 10th, Mark Twitchell is arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Every piece of evidence collected, every forensic test conducted, every witness interviewed, every digital record examined, the case built itself through Mark's own incompetence and arrogance. The final evidence inventory from the garage scene included 47 blood samples, all DNA matched to Johnny Altinger, 12 weapons and tools with biological evidence, 156 photographs of the crime scene, 3 hours of video documentation, plastic sheeting with blood evidence and DNA, game table with restraint materials and blood evidence, cleaning supplies with trace blood evidence, Johnny's personal effects, wallet, keys, phone, Mark's laptop with complete digital confession, garbage bags containing remains, clothing with blood spatter, and DNA evidence. The forensic report ran to 847 pages. Every piece of evidence documented, photographed, tested, analyzed, and cataloged. Every test result recorded. Every chain of custody maintained. Every scientific standard met. Mark's artistic kill room was just a dirty garage where a brutal, ugly, common murder took place. No artistry, no sophistication, no evidence of criminal genius, only violence, cruelty, and physical evidence of a human being's last moments fighting against a killer, too incompetent to accomplish his own fantasy. Every piece of evidence left behind, every bloodstain he couldn't clean, every trace of DNA he didn't know existed, every forensic marker he didn't understand, every digital record he kept, every photograph he took, every search query he made, it all combined to create an airtight case that a first-year law student could prosecute successfully. The garage at 5610 86th Avenue stands as testament not to sophistication, but to failure. Not to artistry, but to brutality. Not to intelligence, but to staggering, catastrophic stupidity. Mark Twitchell wanted to create a masterpiece. Instead, he created the most thoroughly documented, easily prosecuted murder case in Edmonton police service history. Giles Tetralon's escape was Mark's first failure, the first crack in the fantasy. His first victim fought back and escaped. His perfect methodology failed within minutes of real-world application. But Giles' survival meant there was a witness, a living witness who could describe the garage, the attack, the man who tried to kill him. When Giles came forward after hearing about Johnny's disappearance, when he told police about his own attack 1 week earlier, investigators suddenly had a pattern, a methodology, a description of the perpetrator. Giles' testimony placed Mark at the scene. His description of the garage matched where Johnny was last seen. His account of the attack with the hockey mask, pipe, sudden violence, it gave investigators a clear picture of what happened to Johnny. When police interviewed Giles, he described everything: the fake dating profile, the messages from Sheena, the garage address, the interior layout, the hockey mask, the pipe, the attack, the struggle, and his escape. Every detail became part of the investigation. Every piece of information was a thread investigators could pull. Giles described his attacker's build, height, movement. He described the garage's location, appearance, and setup. He provided timeline and context. Everything investigators needed to connect his attack to Johnny's disappearance. When police obtained the warrant and entered that garage, everything Giles had described was there. Everything he'd testified to was corroborated by physical evidence. Mark's first victim destroyed him. The man attacked on October 3rd of 2008, who fought back and escaped, who survived the perfect methodology, he was the beginning of Mark's end. Every piece of evidence that followed, every forensic analyst, every witness statement, every element of the case, it all started with Giles Tetralon refusing to die in that garage. Mark wanted victims who were helpless, who would be overwhelmed by surprise attack, who would submit to his control, and who would play their parts in his twisted screenplay. People who would die according to his artistic vision. But Giles was a human being with survival instinct and strength and a will to live. When Mark attacked him and he fought back with everything he had, he didn't follow the script. He didn't play his assigned role. He survived. And in surviving, he destroyed the fantasy. That's the reality of violence Mark couldn't understand from watching television. Real victims don't cooperate. Real violence is chaotic and unpredictable. And real murder leaves witnesses and evidence and consequences. Giles' escape was the moment Mark's dream died. When his fantasy of being the perfect killer collided with reality that he was just a violent criminal who couldn't even successfully attack a single victim. That failure set in motion everything that followed. The investigation, the evidence collection, witness testimony, conviction, and a life sentence. When Edmonton police obtained a warrant for Mark's laptop on November 4th, they found a confession so detailed that Detective Bill Clark, with decades of homicide experience, had never seen anything like it. Mark hadn't just left forensic evidence. He created a digital archive of his entire criminal enterprise and saved it on his personal computer with his name attached. And that laptop, it contained everything. SK Confessions was a 31-page first-person perspective about a filmmaker who lures victims to his garage and murders them. Not vague, not metaphorical. Literally a step-by-step instruction manual matching the actual crimes in excruciating detail. It described creating fake profiles for Sheena and Jen, the exact names used to contact Giles and Johnny. It described the messages, the psychological manipulation. Police found those exact messages in his email, word for word matches. It described the garage layout, plastic sheeting, game table, weapon positioning, lighting. Every detail matched the crime scene. It described the attack methodology, the hockey mask, the pipe, surprise violence. Giles had described exactly this. It described restraints in the form of zip ties, duct tape, and rope, all found at the scene of Johnny with Johnny's DNA. It described a murder weapon, a serrated hunting knife, multiple torso stabs. The medical examiner's report confirmed it. It described dismemberment and disposal, garbage bags, storm sewer attempt, field dumping. Johnny's remains were found exactly as described. Every single detail matched. But the screenplay was just the beginning of Mark's digital confession, because Mark hadn't just written about his crimes. He had researched everything on his personal computer without hiding his digital footprint. He searched how to dispose of a human body and luminal detection of blood, how to clean up a crime scene, body dismemberment techniques, Dexter Morgan kill room setup. He had searched for all of this on his personal computer using his own internet connection without any attempt to hide his digital footprint because Mark Twitchell, the self-proclaimed genius, apparently didn't understand that the internet keeps receipts. The laptop also contained Mark's email communications with his victims, the messages to Giles sent from the fake Sheena profile, the messages to Johnny sent from the fake Jen profile, every message to victims saved in his sent folder. Mark had even kept drafts he'd revised, perfecting his lure-like screenplay dialogue, revising and editing until he got the tone just right. A documentary record of his predatory methodology. The laptop also contained his blog posts, the one where he wrote about his dark artistic journey, his Dexter obsession, and feeling different from other people. And then, of course, there were the photographs of the garage and documenting his setup like a homeowner showing off a renovation project. There were financial records showing his purchase of the weapons, the plastic sheeting, the cleaning supplies, with credit card statements for Home Depot materials, receipts for the hunting knife, and a paper trail of every item used in his crime. And then there was the piece de resistance, Mark's personal journal entries. Because, of course, this narcissistic fuck kept a journal. Of course, he documented his thoughts and feelings about his crimes, and of course, he couldn't just commit murder. He had to write about it, to process it, and to turn it into content for his own consumption. The journal entries were damning. His excitement before the attacks, his disappointment when Giles escaped, his determination to do better next time. His satisfaction after killing Johnny. He believed that he was too intelligent to be caught, how killing made him feel powerful, special, and gave him accomplishment his failed film career never had. Mark had created a complete digital archive of his descent into murder, saved it all, no encryption, no attempt to hide or destroy the evidence. During his interrogation on October 31st of 2008, Mark claimed the screenplay was fiction, that the similarities between his screenplay and the actual crimes were just coincidental. He tried to claim that he was being prosecuted for his artistic vision. Detective Clark wasn't buying it. He said, quote, "Your screenplay describes the exact garage where we found blood evidence, the exact methodology used in an actual attack, body disposal matching where we found remains. This isn't fiction. This is a confession." Mark tried claiming he'd found Johnny's body, that someone else had killed him, and Mark had just disposed of the remains. He claimed that he found him and he panicked and didn't know what to do and then made the bad decision, but he wasn't a murderer. Detective Clark states, quote, "So you just happened to find a body and just happened to have written screenplay about it, happened to have fake dating profiles matching those used to lure the victim, happened to have garage setup matching your screenplay description?" Mark had no answer. His own evidence had trapped him. The psychological evaluation revealed narcissistic personality disorder within delusional features. Mark genuinely believed he was special, and that he was more intelligent than everyone. His artistic vision elevated him above moral constraints. He believed documenting his crimes made them art rather than evidence. He believed that his screenplay was a creative masterpiece rather than a confession. The psychologist testified that Mark showed no genuine remorse, only regret for being caught. Frustration, people didn't understand his vision. Anger that his work was being used against him, but remorse for taking a life, empathy for his victim's suffering, understanding the pain he had caused, none of that registered. The trial was anticlimactic. The prosecution presented the screenplay, they presented the laptop evidence, Giles' testimony, forensic evidence, remains, search history, fake profiles, emails, journal entries, and photographs. The defense? Well, they had nothing. I mean, what could they possibly argue? That all of this evidence was coincidental? That Mark just happened to write a screenplay about murders and then they actually occurred? Using his methodology and his garage with his weapons? That he just happened to have fake profiles matching the ones used to lure the victims? That he just happened to have research, body disposal, and forensic evidence evasion? The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours. On April 12th, 2011, Mark Twitchell was convicted of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. Mark wanted to be remembered as a sophisticated serial killer, the next Dexter Morgan, a criminal genius operating beyond the comprehension of ordinary people. Instead, he became a cautionary tale, a punchline, a case study in how narcissism and stupidity can combine to create the perfect self-conviction. He failed at filmmaking. His Star Wars fan film was unwatchable. He failed at murder. His first victim escaped, and his second victim's disappearance immediately triggered an investigation. He failed at covering his tracks. He left forensic evidence everywhere, kept a digital archive of his crimes. He failed at being a sophisticated killer, and he was caught within weeks, convicted on the strength of his own evidence, and will spend the rest of his life in prison. But most of all, he failed at being special, at being remembered, and at mattering. Although Mark Twitchell will be remembered, but not in the way that he wanted. He won't be remembered as an artist or a genius or a sophisticated criminal. He'll be remembered as the idiot who wrote a detailed confession to murder and called it a screenplay. The failed filmmaker who thought watching TV made him a killer. The narcissist who was so convinced of his own intelligence that he documented every crime and saved it on his laptop. That evidence was his screenplay, his artistic masterpiece, detailing every aspect of his crimes so explicitly that prosecutors barely needed other evidence. Mark thought writing about murder elevated him above the act, that it made him an artist rather than a criminal, and he was catastrophically wrong. Because that screenplay wasn't art. It was just a 31-page confession, proving premeditation, demonstrating methodology, establishing motive, connecting him directly to the murder of Johnny Altinger, the single most damning piece of evidence in the entire case, and he wrote it himself, saved it, and kept it in his possession. You wanted to be Dexter Morgan. You wanted to be the perfect killer who never got caught, who operated with surgical precision, and who was always 3 steps ahead of the police. But Dexter was fiction. Mark was just a failed filmmaker with delusions of grandeur, a narcissist who thought murder would make him special, an idiot who wrote down his crimes and called it art. He wasn't sophisticated, he wasn't intelligent, and he wasn't special. He was just another killer who got caught because he couldn't understand the difference between fantasy and reality, between art and evidence, and between television and actual murder. Now he'll spend the rest of his life in prison reflecting on his failures, failed film career, failed murders, failed sophistication, failed belief he was too intelligent to be caught. Every goal missed, every fantasy disproven by reality. He wanted to create a masterpiece. Instead, he created the case against himself. He wanted to be remembered as a genius. Instead, he's remembered as one of the dumbest criminals in modern history. Just stupidity, narcissism, complete failure at everything he attempted. He thought he could do it better than Dexter. He couldn't even do it better than the average criminal with sense enough not to write down their crimes. Congratulations, Mark. You're special after all. Just not in the way you wanted. And with that, besties, we're closing the book on the story of Mark Twitchell. This case is a reminder that sometimes the thing that brings someone down isn't a lack of intelligence. It's believing they're the smartest person in the room. Mark wanted to create a story where he was the mastermind, but the only legacy he created was one he built on ignorance, obsession, and the consequences of his own choices. But before we close out today, I want to take a moment to remember Johnny Altinger. He wasn't a character in someone else's story. He was a person with a life, a family, and people who cared about him, and that is the part of the story that matters most. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to follow, subscribe, and share Thick Thighs and Murder Vibes with your fellow true crime besties. And if you have a minute, leaving a 5-star review helps more than you know, and helps other besties find the show. Until next time, stay safe, trust your gut, and remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones where someone thinks they're the hero.